Hello again, and welcome back to the That Was Stupid podcast. I am your host, John Seidel, and this week is going to be fun. We are doing something. We've been heavy lately, and that's good, and that's okay. And I've loved the stories that we've talked about, but I think we also need to take a break at some points, and just kind of have a little bit of fun or lighten things up a little bit. And this week is going to be a little lighter, right? We are talking about going to space. And so some of you are like, what? And I'm like, yep, we're talking about going to space. We actually have, I think I teased this in the intro to the entire season, that we're going to be talking to someone from NASA. And so that is this week. We are talking to someone who used to do PR for NASA and has started a nonprofit all about getting stories to space. And her name is Beth Mund, and she's going to tell us about her journey, how she got to NASA, and then how she is now spending a lot of money, of her own money, to help people get their stories to space. But before we do that, just a reminder that That Was Stupid is brought to you by the Veritas Creative. If you have a story inside of you that you want to get out, contact the Veritas Creative, theveritascreative.com, and they will help you get your idea on paper, published on Amazon if that's what you want, and walk you through the entire process. So go to theveritascreative.com. So we have Beth Mund. Like I said, she is a veteran of NASA. She now runs a nonprofit, and we are going to have fun. We're going to talk about getting stories to space and how you, my friend, my listener, can actually get your story to space right now for the next mission that she is sending up. So without further ado, Beth Mund. Beth, thank you so much for joining the That Was Stupid podcast. We were kind of joking a little bit earlier that I'm really excited about this episode because we really have been dealing with a lot of heavy stuff on the show this season, and yours is going to be not so heavy, and it's going to be really fun. Not like the other ones aren't like fun, but they're fun differently, Right. So I'm really excited to have you.
Hi, John. Thank you. The only heavy I do is heavy whipping cream.
Yeah. With a smooth, silky voice. She really does. Beth really does do voiceovers. If you've noticed how amazing her voice is already, she does do voiceovers.
Thank you. People laugh because they say, but really, what's your real voice? And I'm like, this is my voice. And the kids and my family are the only people who know, like, oh, mom's in voiceover voice, but it's not much different. It just gets a little raised and sharper if you don't pick up your clothes,
Yeah. It's funny. My son, I had my family visiting from Wisconsin a few months ago, and
hey,
because Beth is in Chicago. Yeah. Yes. So, and my son, I must have got really stern with him, and he's 6, and he goes, Daddy, don't you use those low tones with me. Oh. And my brother who was visiting just lost it, and he's like, and now he's adopted that vernacular. So whenever between him and his wife, my sister-in-law, they'll now joke with each other. Don't you use those low tones with me?
I love it. What do you mean? Like so you go low when you're gonna discipline? You're like,
I guess I do.
You go put that down right now, like low.
Yeah, I'm like, Jack, you better put that down right now. I guess I do.
I love that. I would tune into that, but also be like, okay, Dad's serious. I hear him, but now you got to throw it back in. Now you get to say, don't you make me low tone you.
Yes. Right yes. Now I got that's got to become the threat. Right. Mm-hmm. So it's funny. Our kids pick up, right? They say more is caught than taught. And so now I'm sure, he's going to discipline his kids with low tones. Love it. So anyways, voices are great. So Beth is, Beth and I met, like I referenced, we met at a conference where I was speaking, and it was really funny because I think we were like getting Chick-fil-A out in the break room or something. And I can't remember exactly what you said, Beth. I think you were like, hey, I'd love to have you on my podcast. And I said, oh, well, what's the name of it? And you told me the name, which is, what's the name again?
Casual Space.
Casual Space. Okay. And I made a joke. I thought I was being so funny. And I'm like, oh, like outer space. And you're like, deadpanned. Yeah. You're like, yeah. And I'm like, Oh, okay. Outer space. So let's talk about what your background. So I want to fill everyone in. Let's kind of go through. We don't have to spend a ton of time, but just give people the background. Why are you hosting a podcast on outer space?
Oh my goodness. Thanks, John. It's been really fun to share this story. It's a short story. I'll get it real quick. I started at NASA. I actually started at Space Camp, and I knew very young that somehow, some way I was going to work in space industry. Didn't know how. And after years of applications and degrees and education, I did get my dream job at NASA, and it was fantastic, where I spent several years there, and I was a communicator and a public affairs officer, and I got to witness and help. I say help build, but I didn't do it. I wish I could claim that, but I watched the International Space Station be assembled in space. So it was such an honor to work at the Johnson Space Center. And after I left, I decided space is still part of me. Even though I had corporate jobs, I had other, local municipality jobs that I loved, but space kept knocking at my door. And I started the Casual Space podcast because people would come to find that I worked at NASA, and they would share with me their most precious story or insight or relation to space. And everyone has one, whether it's you're a Star Trek fan or a Star Wars fan, or in my case, someone's uncle's brother's cousin used to work on the ship that retrieved the Apollo capsule from the ocean. Wow. When they returned. And I'm like, thank you for sharing that story with me. But I had a very realistic understanding that story only lived in that transaction. And what a shame. What a shame. So I said, I got to put these stories somewhere. I've got to collect them. I've got to share them. They're so inspiring. Yeah. And I worked at NASA. So if I'm hearing stories outside of NASA, then there's more. And I started the podcast to do exactly that. So on Casual Space, we just casually approach topics and ideas and fun things about space exploration that families can listen to. We have a lot of fun. We poke fun at movies that are really bad about space. I know we've seen a few. But I also have I have astronauts on, I have CEOs on, and we all talk about our mutual love for space exploration.
I love that. And so I'll share my Casual Space connection.
Oh, please.
Which is really not great, except for the fact that growing up in Wisconsin, and people don't realize this because I told my wife who grew up in Texas this, and she didn't really believe me at first. And I said, there was someone said something about the Northern Lights. And I said, oh yeah, I grew up watching the Northern Lights. And she's like, what? And I'm like, yeah, I could see, in Wisconsin, like we can see the Northern Lights.
Wow.
And she didn't believe me. And I remember on multiple occasions. Now listen, it's not like she also lived a little bit in Alaska where it's like, you really see the Northern Lights. Right. But growing up in Wisconsin, I mean, it was, I would say, almost every year there was a time
I've never seen them, John. That's incredible. And I'm just like, 200 miles south?
But you probably have a lot of light wash, with Chicago and stuff like that. But like I lived in the country in Wisconsin. And so I grew up regularly seeing the Northern Lights, and it was like an amazing thing. Yeah. So that's my fascination with space. And I love
you and I. Yeah. That's fantastic. You and I both have a connection. We both married Texans.
That's right.
Or at least. So when I first moved to Texas for my job, their stars at night are truly big and bright, deep in the heart of Texas. And
See, I told you we're going to have fun.
I love it. And I've never seen stars like that, but just one other time in Hawaii at the top of one of the volcanoes where, I mean, it's just breathtakingly humble. But you're right, Dallas, outside of Houston, if you can find some non-polluted light, it's just expansive and beautiful like I've never seen before. Yeah. So I'm glad you've been able to have both experiences.
It was like I loved staring up and being like, is that a shooting star or satellite? Right? Like the whatever the song says. But that was always fun. So anyways, that's my Casual Space story.
Oh, thank you. That's perfect. You're in.
I'm in the club, right?
Yes,
Come on,
you are.
Live long and prosper. Can you take us back a little bit? How did you end up landing your dream job? Because you were basically a PR person for NASA. Is
Yeah.
kind of how I would explain it, but I'm sure there's more technical way. But
That's right.
explain how you landed that job and what you did on a day-to-day basis, because I think that's pretty cool.
Oh, thank you. It was pretty cool. I discovered through Space Camp that, well, all the top 1%ers become the pilots and the commanders and the astronauts. And when I got assigned my duty or my role at Space Camp on the team, I was a mission specialist. Mission specialist. So you get to be in charge of the experiments. You get to be in charge of some of the stuff that's on board. You're like the support team staff, which is cool, but it's also not the traditional sense of what you're thinking when you go to space.
Right.
And this is like 99% of everyone who ever touches anything space related. So few people. There's only, I think it's under 500 people total. Even ramped up now with our commercial space flight attendance, we have under 500 people that have gone to space. So now that's changing, and that's a good thing. But for me growing up, I'm like, I don't necessarily have to go, but I want to support something that is just so cool. And at NASA, when I finally got the job, which was after many late nights in corporate crushing zone where I was just, trying to climb the ladder and do the things, I just kept applying over and over again. And I'm talking 6, 7, 8, 9 NASA rejection letters. And it didn't faze me. I'm like, okay. I mean, I applied to be a janitor. I applied to be a driver to the executives, like just drive them around. This was way back when. And I'm like, I can drive and I can drive. So I can clean. I'll be at NASA any way I can. I just knew that that's where I was going to land. And I did get a couple interviews, but it was always like, they would either find out how young I was or how it didn't really match. And I was really, or overqualified I was, which is fine. So I finally get to NASA as a public affairs officer, and I had the best boss in the world. I still keep in touch with him. He was a Marine and he had no excuses. And he trained me up to the best job. And I got the privilege, as I said, to tell the NASA story within NASA. So I got to tell it both to the NASA employees at the Johnson Space Center as an internal communication person. And that's like writing your newsletters, explaining the finances, things like that.
Yeah.
And then I moved into the International Space Station program, where I got to tell the taxpayers, you and I, where our money was going. What is it? What are we funding? What goes on up there? Who gets to fly? What experiments go up there? And that was such a joy. And then it all kind of came to a little bit of a halt when we lost Columbia. And at that time, we stopped flying. Only the Russian space station, only the Russians were flying a small Soyuz capsule to station back and forth to resupply. And so all of NASA was basically grounded while we investigated and came up with answers as to why we lost the Columbia crew and their vehicle. And then once we started to fly again, I had since then left NASA and moved into another corporate job, still being a communicator at a very high level. But it was time. It was hard to see our future at the time at NASA when you didn't know when we were going to fly again or how. So once that got back into flight status, which was years later, we celebrated. We watched the International Space Station continue to be assembled. And now it's been there for almost 25 years. Our orbiting laboratory where humans have lived off the planet almost, well, since your kids and my kids, that's what they've known their whole life, that people have lived off planet Earth, which is phenomenal. And now they're building commercial space stations outside of the International Space Station. So governments have come together throughout the many last years, but now commercial entities will get to go and they'll get to fly way more experiments than just the NASA approved, government regulated experiments. And that's where I think the rest of my stupid story comes into play.
Okay. Yes. Time out though. I got to ask 2 questions before. They're burning questions.
Oh,
One, the craziest thing you ever encountered at NASA or heard of encountering at NASA.
I wish, is this a family friendly show or not so much?
I mean, it's just normal.
Okay.
You tell the story, and if we need to edit it out, we will.
Oh,
How
good.
about that?
Okay. I did not encounter this, but this happened while I was at NASA, and NASA's big. It had hundreds of thousands of employees, and there's 10 NASA centers all over the country. But while we were there, and I say we, my husband and I met there, and we didn't know each other at the time, but this was all happening. There was a group of interns who stole the moon rocks. Do you remember this story? This
I
happened
don't.
while I was there. Yeah. So there was a bunch of interns and I knew nothing about it. Thank goodness. Long after I left NASA, because let me just tell you, I wish you could have those people on the show because man, what were they thinking? Talk
Oh
about
my
that was
goodness.
stupid. Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's just a privilege to work at NASA, no matter who you talk to, whether you're on any team, whether it's accounting, videography, anything. It's just you recognize that you're part of this well-oiled machine with a mission, a very clear mission. And sometimes the mission is a literal mission, and sometimes the mission is building, researching, discovering. Like you're just very tied to know that you have a place where you belong on part of a team that has to move mission forward. So you honor that and you're very excited to be there. So some punk interns over the summer, over their experience, decided to steal moon rocks and sell them on eBay because they had access to the lunar facility where those rocks were kept and being tested and being looked at. Again, I didn't know this till years afterwards. And just being an intern, like you don't step out of line. If you're an intern at NASA, you're working hard to land eventually your job at NASA. So you really have some pretty solid, experiences that just keep you on the path. But for whatever reason, this one particular fella took them, and then a group of the three of them sold them on eBay after they did some nefarious things with the rocks, which is for another adult show. And so they found the rocks. The FBI literally found them under a sting investigation where these kids, interns, sold them on eBay. They were discovered. And let's just say, John, they disappeared for some time. I mean, they literally went to some FBI program / facility. Bye-bye. Where did they go? Nobody knows. No questions. So later this all surfaces and later it comes out in some, articles and news reports and stuff. And it's true, but that's the weirdest thing I've ever heard at NASA. It's just so profoundly odd. Yeah.
That's a definitely that was stupid moment. And then listen, I would be remiss if I have someone who worked in PR at NASA and I didn't ask them the alien question. So
I know. Yeah.
Give us the 411 on ET.
Yes.
Is it real?
Aliens.
Are we alone? Yeah. Are we not alone?
It's us. No, I think, I didn't obviously see any when I was there, but I will tell you this. My husband and I we laughed so hard. We wish we would have done this right before we left. There's a tram tour that goes through the NASA campus, certain parts of the NASA campus.
Yeah.
And we said on our last day of work, what if we you dress up as an alien and I'll dress up as a mad scientist and I'll chase you across the tram tour route and we'll just go from one building in the background to the other, chasing each other and just leave it at that. And then we'll literally be officially resigning and turning in our badge. Obviously, we never did that. We think it's funny. We thought it was funny at the time as well, but that would never happen. That would have been my last day.
That would have been another great That Was Stupid story, but amazing. Okay. All right. Well,
my favorite astronaut is Gordon Cooper, and he does write as the original Mercury 7, one of the original Mercury 7 astronauts. He had hours, thousands of hours as a pilot, as a flying pilot. And he admitted, and he was one of the only original astronauts that admitted to seeing things in the sky when he would fly. All the other astronauts, maybe they did see things, but they didn't necessarily report them so that they could keep their jobs and their status and their flight assignments. But Gordon Cooper was always brave enough to put it out there. And he says he saw things, so why not?
Okay. Well, there we go. We'll leave it at that. We could do a whole episode on that stuff. But I just had to ask. Okay, so let's get into your That Was Stupid story. Because it's the The quick version is you fly things to space. You send things up into space. And in fact, there's a text that you got today that I think is just so awesome that we'll get to in a second. But that was stupid. Your that was stupid story is that you're trying to send and are sending things into space. Tell us about that.
So with the podcast that we've already introduced, I had this opportunity to sit down with this amazing woman who's the CEO of a space company adjacent to NASA. Her family worked for a NASA contractor, and she grew up learning the business of not only NASA, but how her father ran a total contracting company that would be of service to NASA. And her name is Stephanie Murphy. She's the CEO of Aegis Aerospace. And I had her on the show because I love having power women, especially in the space industry, showcase their pathway for future women to see how it might be done. So we're talking about her love of space and how she got started and how darn hard it is to be not only a CEO as a woman, but in the space industry, because there's only like 8, 10, there's just at the time so few. And as we're talking, we wrap up. And I said, thank you so much, Stephanie. If I can ever be of service to you in any way, let me know. And she said, Beth, thank you. If you ever want to fly something to space, we're your company. And I said, thank you. And we wrapped it up very professionally, as we podcasters do. And then when we left, it just burned into my soul. I'm like, was she serious? Was that a planet? What was that? And an invitation? Was it for real? So I called Stephanie. I said, were you serious in that invitation? She's like, yeah. And I asked her, I'm like, what kinds of things get flown to space? And she said everything from heirloom items, photos, rings, keychains,
Wow.
sometimes stickers, living things sometimes, but that's more on the NASA side. So let me explain a little bit about what these space companies that fly things do and why.
Yes.
These companies, NASA has a long list, and there's an official name for it, a flight list that has been years in the waiting. Academic institutions, government organizations, material science, like all of these things want to fly. They want to test in the space environment. So if you're lucky enough to get selected to fly your payload on the manifest, which is again that list of things that are going to go to space, then good for you. You are one of the few. Everyone else who has experiments and academics and tests, things they want to test that are very important to our future and exploration, whether it's through the Space Force, Air Force, satellites we want to test for farming use, material science that we want to see how it holds up in such a stressful environment. All that stuff goes on you're nice, but you're on the wait list.
Right.
Maybe like 2030 will fly you. And what to do with that, right? So these other companies that now have access to cheaper launch vehicles that are flying and launching more often, they really can take these leftover payloads that don't get selected by NASA or ESA. So here we are back at Aegis, and she's making this offer. And I said, if I get my thoughts together and make you a proposal, would you be open to hearing it? And she said, yeah, sure. So oh my God, I didn't sleep. And I sat for nights and nights, and I said, what would I fly? And this burned in my brain. If you had a chance, John, think about what's the one thing you'd fly to space. And
I'd fly. I already know.
Oh, what? Let me guess. A book.
Yes, I'd fly my book. I'd fly my book to space. And then I'd be like, I'm a best-selling author that has had his book that my book is literally out of this world. Like, and I would make a whole marketing. I would make a whole marketing thing about it. My book is out of this world. That's it. That's what I would do.
Well, guess what? You can do that.
And we're going to talk about that. Yes.
Okay. So back to the story real quick. She said, I'm burning in my brain. Would I fly my wedding ring? Would I fly a picture of the kids? Like, what would I fly? What would I fly? And I thought about that. And I thought, if I did fly something, who cares? What am I going to do? Go around town and be like, see this ring? It flew to space. Nobody cares. So I'm like, I need to how can all my friends and colleagues and people I know be part of this so that it's not just my experience, right? And I'm like, what does that look like? So I said to Stephanie, I'm going to pitch you in a week. I got it. And when I did, I said, Stephanie, we're going to fly stories. We're going to fly the stories that are shared on my podcast. We're going to fly stories that people submit. We're going to fly stories from kids all over the world. We're going to put them on a little micro SD card because she was really concerned. She's like, what do you mean, like a live broadcast from space? I'm like, no, 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 no. We're going to capture them in a record, and that record will be not a literal record from like you and I's time, like,
Right.
LP, but these little micro digital SD cards that you have in your computer, in your phone, in your cameras. We'll capture all the stories on that and we'll fly it to space. It's less than 3 grams of weight because space equals weight equals cost. So it had to be small, and it had to be what they call static payload, which means it doesn't have any electricity. It doesn't have any biologics, which nothing alive is required to go, because that's a whole different experiment. And it had to be like really simple. So here we are. And she said yes. And then Stories of Space was born. And I said, all right, now I had 2 choices. And here comes the stupid part. Find a way to get this flight on time going in the summer of 2023, or find the money and then figure out how you're going to fly again. So it was either work the deadline and get those stories and pay, or find the money first and then figure it out. And I did the stupid thing. Well, I'll let the audience judge. I just put a lot of money, thousands of dollars, tens of thousands of dollars of my own money to launch the Stories of Space project. Now, at the time, it was a project because we had to proof of flight. We just had to be like, can we do this? And I partnered with Utah State University, and I said, hey, when these cards come back, they're probably going to be damaged. Do you want to do like a material science experiment from the cards along with the content, the actual, electronic database that will be on the card, but we can also test the card itself. So not only are we taking stories, but we're also doing science. And they said yes. So now I have an academic partner. I've got a rocket. Yeah. And so flight number 1 in the bag. The whole family and I, we go down to Wallops, which is on the East Coast. It's one of the NASA centers, and it launches on August 1st, 2023. And never in my life had I had such a moment where I'm like, hundreds of thousands of stories are on that card. That card is on that rocket. That rocket is launching above my eyes. I can't believe this. It stayed on station in space for millions and millions of miles for 8 months. And then it came back down to space. And now those cards are on my desk.
Okay. I got so many questions. Wow. Okay. So first of all, how did you just like randomly reach out to Utah State University? Did you have a connection there?
So I had 2 wonderful intern students, Katie and Bailey. One of them's at MIT right now. The other one is at a news station in Florida. They're such talented young ladies. And I said, this has got to be done before. I'm a big proponent of like, how has this ever been done, or has this been done? And we saw that the Utah State University had a ton of published papers that we found online about material science, because they had taken some very tiny, tiny materials and they had flown them through the traditional way, through NASA, to a space station where those materials were exposed to space and they disintegrated. Basically, they were different samples of materials. Think soft materials, harder metals, all kinds of stuff that when they launched and they were just out in the open in space in that harsh radiation environment, they get destroyed. And then when they were brought back, they were discolored. The molecules had changed. And it was pretty evident, like you could see the results. And that was through an academic partnership that NASA approved. So they had a history. And that's why we reached out to them and we said, hey, do you want to do this with a micro SD card? And it turns out microelectronics is $1 billion industry for satellites and small satellites. When they use their data storage, they use the same SD cards that you and I use right here on Earth. And they are able to back up with multiple cards because they're so inexpensive. So Utah State said, yes, ma'am. And we brought those cards to them. They prepared them, and they've since now been to space and back, and now back at Utah State University getting those results.
Okay. So how many stories, how many cards did you send up?
We got the privilege of sending 50 cards, 50 microchips. So not the whole SD card traditionally, like you kind of think you plug in, but the smaller chip within that card. So
Okay.
think like half the size of your pinky nail, half that
Yeah.
size, tiny,
And
55 of those.
how many stories were on each card?
The
Each
cards were
chip.
completely full. I had to fill the cards. We're talking over 300 stories, but
On
300
each chip.
stories repeated. Yes.
And
Thousands.
wow. Okay. And so how long were these stories?
The stories were 3,000 characters or less. So brief, like 2 pages worth of stories.
Okay. And how did you solicit them?
Oh, this was the tricky part. If I was going to partner with NASA and with the National Space Station Laboratory, which is responsible for all the things that fly to space, NASA is NASA, but the National Laboratory, helps manage that manifest of what goes and what comes and all those things. I knew if their eyes were on any part of this, those stories had to be appropriate. They couldn't be, anything inappropriate, basically. So nothing too violent or had bad references, or I'm not talking about spelling or grammar.
Right.
Those are uniquely creative stories. But I just had to make sure they were clean. I had to make sure they weren't, just appropriate to go. So I read every single story, and I guaranteed NASA I would be. And that was fun. It really was, because it really showed me what people were thinking. Then I got to start to categorize those stories. Can you guess what the top 3 categories are of the stories I got sent, content wise?
Dreams, like not like physical dreams, but like wishes, wishes, like wishes, family stories.
Yeah.
And I'm stumped.
Okay, that's great. And that would be one of the categories, yes. The other one was like biology and medicine, like space medicine, like how we as humans would survive in space. Tons of stories about that. And one of the final categories was, I'm going to call it violence or war, like battles, like conflict stories, like this planet goes against that planet, or these people go against these other humans that live in a different part of the galaxy. So there was always a sense of conflict. So yes, dreams, yes, like biology and how space medicine was going to go. And the fourth actually was careers, like what kinds of jobs were happening in space. And the ones I got to read about, like, they were made up. They were extensions of already created Earth known jobs. It was phenomenal.
So let me clarify. So when you say space stories, were they were making things up? Like it was fiction? They were writing like
Yes.
3,000 character
Some
fictions?
were. Mm-hmm. Most of them were. Most of them were
Okay.
stories, like fictional stories. But some people wrote about what you said, John, which was, I feel connected to my family who's across the whole world in another country when we look at the North Star. I feel, or someone wrote their white papers. Someone sent us their white papers for a highly technical idea on propulsion systems. And we took that story. We took some poems. We took lyrics from songs. As long as it's the written word, we fly it.
Wow. Okay. So it stays up there for 8 months, you said?
This first flight, it did. Yes.
And what was it doing up there? To the ISS?
To the ISS. It sat outside. It did not come in. It didn't come in until the very end, like the last week where it got packed to return to Earth. So it sat outside where a lot of other experiments did. And it sits in like, think of a U-Haul, and think of in a U-Haul going up to station. And then they pull out a chest of drawers. And then that chest of drawers opens and there's all your experiments. That's the rough description of how this works, but how it really works is this MISSE container, and MISSE stands for Materials Experiments on the International Space Station, or MISSE, Materials International Space Station Experiments, excuse me. And so everyone submits their materials, they tuck them into this drawer, the drawer flies on a rocket, the whole cabinet type of thing, and then it opens. It's like the drawer pulls itself open and it unfolds, and all those experiments are literally out in space to be in the harsh environment of heat, extreme cold, radiation bombardment.
Wow.
And they come back totally destroyed, which happened to our cards.
Yeah. Okay. So then tell me what shape the cards returned in.
So they looked just like they do. You wouldn't see them damaged, but you plug them in and you will see what they call bit flips, which is where the data gets flipped. And so it's not quite this simple, but we can go there. It's like if I wrote a sentence or two, maybe the paragraph scrambled, or maybe the data got lost, or maybe words are completely missing in what we would plug in that SD card and try to run the data. Well, the data would be a bit messy because it got damaged, because these tiny microelectronic parts were either totally in the cold or heated. And, radiation is what.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
And so
Now, not all the cards are damaged, but most, because that's a long time. So imagine what that could do to our bodies if they weren't protected.
Right. And so what did Utah State, you said they're still kind of running the results?
Yeah, Utah State is still running the results of that. There's a lot of cards to test, and there's, it's summer. So right now the students aren't really back in, but there's a team of students and department directors that adhere to the tests. So I can't wait to get those results back really, really soon. But we're already on mission 3. We've flown not only to space station, then we flew on mission 2 in a 0 microgravity environment on a 0G plane, which goes up and down, and in those parabolas that go up to the very high altitudes and then quickly back down, gives you that 0G feeling. Those cards have flown as well. We sent a whole new set of cards with new stories, fresh stories. And later this summer, we're going to be launching from Canada's first commercial space coast in Nova Scotia with our partners Maritime Launch. And they've agreed to take the next set of cards on a suborbital launch, which is very exciting. So, John, your book can go to space this summer.
Wow.
Yeah.
I'm like, my head is just exploding. I'm like, yes, I need to do this, or at least like the cover of my book or something. Yeah. Okay. So when you say you did a nonprofit, so explain the nonprofit aspect of it and how you are, soliciting these stories and getting people to share with you and why a nonprofit.
The stupid part was that I thought it would be like, well, I've already done this once. Like, we've flown to station. We've done proof of concept. So everyone is going to want to do, mission 2 and 3 and 4 and 5. And we're going to keep this going indefinitely. My goal was to just fly them once. And I was like, I can't believe we did this. But more and more people were like, well, how do I get my story? Can I get a story? And I'm like, can we do this again? So I reached out to Aegis and I said, they loved having us. We learned so much partnering together. They're thrilled that we're using and tying in academia. And, we use interns. We have volunteer students. I have all kinds of people that want to work on stories of space. And it was just me. It was literally just me and some friends and some, like, my husband. And we had to run tens of laptops in my dining room all across the table just to get all the stories downloaded and prepared for those SD cards. It has been a homegrown backyard, as authentically organic as an SD card flying to space can get effort, but it wasn't cheap. And I thought, okay, I took the hit on this first one just so I can get them up there and do this partnership, and it works. Could I do it again? And then I said, instead of doing it just me, what if I turn it into an official non-for-profit and let everyone help me fund it so that we can just continue to keep the stories free, all the submissions, and then the work will just be finding the partners that will be able to carry and take and launch those stories. That's going to be easy. Well, it turns out, because I have a NASA background, because I speak space, because I continue to massage and really invest in my relationships, the launch part is the easy part. It's the funding that is horrifically hard, to the point of, what was I thinking, John? It was so stupid. And there's legal costs, and then there's startup costs, and then there's filing, and there's so much to starting a 501c3 that I thought was just going to be like, okay, but just like at NASA, what I learned is you just work the checklist. You just, take one at a time. Nope. A startup is like everything is on fire all at once.
All at once.
And you still have to launch some stuff to space. Ha ha.
Yeah. Yep. Exactly. And so where are you now with the nonprofit and Stories of Space? Like, I mean, obviously you're doing more with it, right? Like, you found funding somehow.
Well, John, I guess 2 of my children are not going to college.
Yeah. No, she's like, I just keep writing the checks. Yeah. I found funding in my college fund.
So I know it's dangerous, right? Sorry, kids. Mama wants to send stuff to space.
Yeah.
It's challenging. I'm always looking for the right partners. Leaders who have done this before, or people who are clearly smarter than me. Please, if this is attracting you, if you find this intriguing, I'd love to sit and talk with you and learn from you, and I'm talking about not just leaders. What about corporate sponsors? I have so many, the SD card makers of the cards that we're flying. You can be our exclusive sponsor. And what you think is a little money would take us so far in a year that we could do so much, because ultimately, here's the goal, John. People are science illiterate, including me. And I worked at NASA, and we found this to be true during COVID. Holy cow. Like, just talking about how viruses can be transferred and simple things and vaccines. We found out very quickly that when it comes to science, we're not really the best at, communicating things. So this is an opportunity from anyone, anywhere, all over the world. If you want to take the intentional time to write a story about space in any way, shape, or form, or science, we will take it and launch it for you, because I believe that you'll have an intention, a creative sense to want to be connected to space in this way. And John, it's easy to take a photo or a selfie or something laying around off your phone and send that to space. And there are other organizations that do that really well. And I applaud them, that take pictures and artwork, and that's fine. But we take the written word because we are on a mission to connect you to space through the written word, through a story, your narrative. So if you take the intentional time to do it, we'll take the time to fly it for you for free. And then we'll absorb all those operational costs and launch costs and partnering costs and academic costs and all those things when we find the money, which will be my challenge for the next several years. I'm not going to lie. But there are partners left and right willing to work with us. People are excited and wanting to fly our stories because it does connect people, and we do share that love of space in a big, grand way. So now it's just going to be a matter of, okay, how do we collect the amount of money that we're going to need to operate for the next couple of years? Because pretty soon we're going to send stories to the moon and then eventually to Mars. That's the goal.
What?
Or that's really stupid. You tell me, John.
No, this is so cool. Where can people go if they're interested in learning more about Stories from Space? If they're interested in listening to your podcast, if they want to, maybe help support this endeavor, where can they go?
Oh, thank you. Okay, John, here's what you're going to do. You're going to send me parts of your book, segments, quotes. You don't have to send the whole book, although I'd be honored to fly it, to launch it. But you can go to storiesofspace.com. And right there, it walks you through mission 3 prompts to say, all you have to do is click right here, click the box that says you're going to send things that are appropriate, right? And the written word. So, okay, you're going to say, but Beth, it only lets me have 3,000 characters or words or what have you. I've got a whole book to send. Great. Send one at a time, as many as you'd like, over and over again. It's all free.
Wow.
If you want to get our updates, you can check out our newsletter. You can watch us as we prepare to launch from Canada later this year. And if you want to listen to our progress as we go, I always share it on the podcast, Casual Space. But John, because you and I know each other, you can send me any part of your book and I'll just put it on that micro SD card for you.
Oh my gosh.
And we'll make sure it gets flown.
And I am going to make a big hubbubaloo about this. And I'm definitely going to say, like, my book is literally out of this world.
Yes.
Probably the only book on, maybe I send both of them, like the mental health one and the alcoholic one, and see, like, I'm the only one. There's a lot of books, maybe on mental health and recovery. Mine are the only ones that are out of this world. I just feel it. I feel it coming.
Right.
Beth, thank you so much. Well, I let me ask you one thing. This is the question I ask everyone before we end. What do you feel like is the lesson of your That Was Stupid story?
I would do it again in a heartbeat. I'm going to find the money, John. The lesson is do the things first, figure it out after. And here's why. It has nothing to do with me. I'm just the conduit. I'm just the guide. These stories, when you read them, and you can go to the database on storiesofspace.com and you can read stories from kids about dinosaurs in space. Sure.
That would be my son.
There's a fox story in space. There's a beautiful story of a mother friend of mine whose daughter found out very young that she had diabetes. And she submitted a story, and it was all about how going to space with diabetes helped her overcome diabetes through some technologies and other things that happened along her journey in space. And you can tell that this story was so thoughtful and owned and future forward and hopeful. That is why I'm going to find the money. That is why I'm going to keep going with each mission. That's the lesson, is that if I have the ability through my NASA experience to continue to do something truly unique to connect people to space in this way, if I do it first, what do they say in if you build it, they will come?
That's right.
So that's my lesson.
Oh, I love that, Beth. Thank you for joining us. I mean, I think, like I said, I knew this was going to be a fun episode, and I think it well needed. It lived up to the hype. I mean, we've done everything from moon rocks to aliens to diabetes stories, right? Like,
oh my gosh,
and thank you for not dropping something too dark or dark on me. Maybe dark matter.
Let's do that next time.
Yeah.
You come on my podcast and we'll do that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay,
absolutely.
Deal.
So go to Stories of Space, right? storiesofspace.com and check out and put your story. And if you do submit a story, let me know, because I'd love to give you guys all an update on what stories go up and the progress of the mission. So Beth Mund, thank you so much for joining us on That Was Stupid.
Thank you, John.
I told you that was going to be fun, right? Like, that was fun. I loved it. I loved Beth. I love her voice. I mean, I think, like, at some point I might just get her to record certain sections of my book so I can just listen to it. And because I like to do the audible narration for my own books, because I think that's helpful. But then it's kind of weird to listen to your own voice, when you're listening to your book. So maybe I'll get Beth to do like the director's cut version, and maybe I'll put that available on Substack for you. But Beth is great. If you want to send your story to space, go ahead and check out her website. It's also in the show notes. Just hoping that you are enjoying this season of That Was Stupid as much as I am. We will be back for another episode very soon. Until then, take care.